Okay, welcome again to our Agile Brisbane meetup group. And the topic today is going to be on Agile is all about mindset. And I'll be the presenter today. And what I'm hoping to do is to kind of open a topic that I've been thinking about for some time, in the sense, I think as Ethan or Chris might have mentioned a little bit earlier, in terms of the discussion around the Agile Alliance to look at whether or not we need to revisit the Agile Manifesto, and with basically looking at where we are at the moment on our Agile journey over the last 20 years or so. So that's really the topic. What I'll do is spend probably about a third to maybe a little bit more than a third on the actual Agile Manifesto itself. Now, I know that a lot of the people in this group are very familiar with what the Agile Manifesto is, but it's quite funny when you don't look at something for 20 years, then it's good to reconnect with that, to just go through each of the values and each of the principles, not an enormous amount of detail because you can't do that in the time that we've got available, but allow us to re-engage with what the actual mindset of those people, what they had at that time, and rethink it or reframe it in terms of the relevance of today. So the agenda that I've got here is to start off by having a kind of a getting back to basics, which is looking at where we find ourselves at the moment. Then looking at what happened, how did we, looking from a kind of a history lesson point of view, is how did we get to where we are now? Then looking at the Agile Manifesto itself, so going through the values and the principles, looking at what is the response to the Agile Manifesto. So what was the journey after the Agile Manifesto came out? And then starting to look a little bit into what is the mindset and what specifically is the Agile mindset. And then beyond that, then a kind of a call to action, you could say. So that's the agenda that I've selected for today. Just a little bit about myself is I'm really passionate about keeping customer value at the center, and something that I've been an Agile evangelist since the manifesto came out. And I think the main reason why I've been an evangelist is because my personal values really align quite closely to the key things that I see in the Agile movement. So customer value, embracing change, and being a servant leader. So making sure that you build up, your role is to move the roadblocks out of the way and allow individuals to be able to succeed in their own right and have them aligned to the vision. So I'll go into that in a bit more detail. So that's a bit about me. Right, so back to basics. One quick thing, there's a sharing toolbar at the top here. Does anyone see that, or is it just on my screen? Okay, good. So we've got Nick is shaking his head, so that's just on mine. So I don't know whether you've heard the term "Agile is dead, long live agility." I've seen it around the traps on a few presentations. I don't know who came out with it originally, but it's a sentiment that says that we've kind of lost our way in terms of the word agile, but that the real thing that we should be focusing on is becoming having more agility. And I guess what I want to do is I want to challenge that a little bit in this presentation. So that's that one. So what happened? What's the journey that we went through to get to where we are now? And I'd like to go back to the olden days when people used to ride on horses and things, actually, not that far back. In the early 90s, there was the field of actually producing software. And I've used the word software here, not because Agile is only about software, but because originally it was completely within the software domain, and only recently did it move out of software into some other things. And back at that time, it was a really chaotic time. So there wasn't a lot of understanding, a lot of discipline as to how software projects could unfold. And back then there was this, and I think they still do it, the Standish Group. They produced yearly reports that said, this is the state of play for how software projects and software initiatives, how they would be executed, and had collected some metrics and published those. So in 1994, what they said is only around 16% of projects were successful. So this was success defined as they were on budget, they were within time, they were to the client satisfaction and that sort of thing. And 16% is an abysmally low figure. You have 31% where everyone agrees that it failed, and 53% where they didn't really agree. So obviously with that being a really, really low figure, it was a cause for concern. I had a personal anecdote about that time that happened on my side. Is I did some work for a company where they had this concept of the Sunday specification. So what the Sunday spec was is that they would go from an RT department point of view, they'd go and buy the Sunday newspaper, which is a national newspaper across the whole country. And they'd turn to page 3, where the company would take out a full page ad. And they would then go and look at the products and that were described there. And that would give them an indication of what the topic would be of the millions of calls that would come through to the call center the next day of people saying, how does this work? Because I did the thing and nothing happened. And so I want to know whether I'm doing something wrong. And so what they would do then is on the next morning, the customer service people would come to the RT department and say, okay, so we've got all these calls. So what is this thing? Because we don't know what this product is. And then the RT department would go off to the finance department and say, well, are you guys charging for this? And then the finance department would say, well, we've never heard of it either. So then they'd all collectively go to the marketing person that took out the advert and go and say to them, so you took out this ad in the paper. Tell me, did you before you took it out, have you got a thought about what it is? What are the business rules? How does it work? How do you charge for it? And then they'd start taking down those details and try and build something that would match that. And maybe sort of 6 months to a year later, the thing would be available and people would start using it. Now, obviously, this had quite a big impact on the company, because it meant that they were losing credibility with the market. They were when the thing was eventually available, often it hadn't been properly tested, and you'd have all issues and so on coming out of that. So one of the things that they asked me to do was to have a look at that. And what I introduced at that time was this brand new approach to delivering things called the waterfall process. And the waterfall process was incredibly useful at that time, because what it did is it allowed them to think about what it was that they were going to build before they designed it, and then before they built it and tested it, made sure they did all of that stuff before they exposed end users to it. And it made a big difference in terms of their ability to deliver and to have products that work together. But of course, as we know, the waterfall process has got a number of pitfalls. For example, you have to wait till the end before you get something normally, and you end up having a very much a command and control type structure in terms of how you manage the teams. You also change is quite costly as well. So if you do need to, you have new insights as you go along, then to go and rework everything becomes a very costly exercise. So in a sense, that kind of led to another software crisis. And I think, as a couple of the people were mentioning earlier, is you had a couple of people got together at the Snowbird ski resort in Utah. And there were 17 thought leaders there. And they got together and they came up with something called the Agile Manifesto. And the reason why they did that was because they said there has to be a better way. There has to be a way in which we can do things, because software is complex. And if we continue the way that we're going, then it's not going to make the figures that the Standish report is coming out with any better. It's not going to solve the problem. So what I'll do now is take us a little bit through the through the values. This is the Agile Manifesto. Yeah, for those of you that haven't seen it, it's you just go to agilemanifesto.org and it takes you right there. Now, what I'll do is I'll go through each of these and just describe really quickly my understanding of what those are. And I'm sure that we can discuss in the discussion afterwards if there's any sort of different nuances on those. The first thing that you'd note when you look at it is that the values are described, these 4 values at the top here are described as one thing over another thing. So what that is saying that you need both of them, but if you need to favor one side, then what you do is you try to favor the one on the left rather than the one on the right. And I know that a lot of people have quoted this first one, which is individuals and interactions over processes and tools. So I think a lot of people look back and said, well, that in that case, you don't need processes and tools, which is not correct at all, because you need them, but you need them only to allow you to have more effective individuals and interactions, not to dominate, to replace having the individuals and interactions. So that's the key focus on that one. But it also highlights something that I learned from Tony Ponton, who's one of my thought leaders, is to look at the connective tissues that you have within an organization, and to really focus on how you allow those connective tissues to be able to create that guiding coalition that can get the product across the line. The next one is working software over comprehensive documentation. So this one says that if you are looking to say, well, traditionally what you would do is you'd have a series of documents that you go through. You have your business requirement specification, and then you go through to your design, your functional design, and then from the functional design you get your technical design, and all of those then inform the thing that you're building, and then your test people normally reconcile the others going back up, and you get to the end, and then you spend the last bit of the project basically verifying what you've done, and then you get it into production, then you support it. So the problem with that, I don't know how many of you have heard of what's called a watermelon project. So a watermelon project is one that's red on the inside but green on the outside. So it looks green, everything looks fantastic, but you get really, really close to the end, to maybe a month before you're supposed to kind of have this great unveiling, and then all of a sudden you find that you need another year or 2 before you can get there. So one of the things that you get with working software is that it's a measure of progress. That you can say you put something in front of people, you get them to use it, you get feedback from that, and that informs the next stage, significantly reduces risk, because you can measure how far you are, because you know that what you've produced is useful and valuable. And if it's not, you can find that out early on and you can change direction. So that's my understanding of what the working software over comprehensive documentation is, not completely about, but one dimension of that. The other one, customer collaboration over contract negotiation. I also think this one's important because it talks about a mindset. It says that when you are looking at the way in which you interact with the collective group of people to produce something, you can view it in 2 ways. And traditionally views the world as a set of individuals or groups that contract with each other for things. So if you look at activity-based approaches to delivery, it's saying, I do something. So I have my customer and I have my supplier. I then collect something from my supplier, I do some work on it, and I pass it on to my customer. And that becomes a long relay race almost of all of the things that you produce. And all the contracts get based on that. And to a large extent, if it becomes a win-lose type contract negotiation, where every particle in that process is trying to get the maximum out for themselves and try and deliver the minimum that they can within the bounds of what they're contracted to do, then that paradigm is less supportive of thinking of innovative ways to solve problems. So the other approach is to say that we've got a whole bunch of really intelligent minds focused on a particular problem, saying, how do we solve this problem in a way that helps us all together? We're all in the same boat. And so this one, it's actually quite a deep statement, because it also talks about having that shared vision as part of it. rather than it just being a set of individual contracts where everyone's trying to deliver the minimum to get there. The other one is responding to change over following a plan. Now, that's not to say that following a plan is not required, as with all of these, is that you need to have some plan in terms of roadmaps or what direction you're going in or how you're going to do things. But that you need to plan in such a way that you're able to change direction cheaply and effectively, because this particular value is all about saying change happens all of the time. You don't want to be in a position where you have this new opportunity and you can say, well, the cost of actually grabbing that opportunity is so high that we're not going to do it. And then you end up after a year or 2 years, you get to the end, you deliver something that was really valuable for what you would have had right at the beginning, but it's no longer relevant right now. And that's what that one's about. So those are the four values of from the Manifesto for Agile Software Development. We also have the 12 principles. So I won't spend as much time on the principles as I have on the values, because I think the values are probably more critical than the principles, but I think that all of these are still relevant today, in the sense that if I run through them, I'll say that the highest priority to satisfy the customer is through early and continuous delivery of valuable software. So that becomes a really important vehicle for being able to have something in place in front of somebody, they're using it, you get feedback from that, and you can continue from that point. Which, if you have things working in a very short time span, it means that everything's still in people's minds. The main reason for writing down things as you would in your business requirement specification and so on is because of the long times involved. People forget. So by having short time spans means that everything is still in people's minds. You build something, and then that thing becomes the reference model that you use for building the next thing. So that's why I think that first one's quite important. The next one is welcome changing requirements, even late in development. Agile processes harness change for the customer's competitive advantage. And I think I've already mentioned that a fair bit earlier today. The deliver working software frequently from a couple of weeks to a couple of months with a preference for the shorter timescale. I think I've touched on that as well. Business people and developers must work together daily throughout the project. And I'd like to spend a tiny bit of time on this one, is that traditionally software development seen as a relay race. So what you do is that each stage goes and passes the baton to the next one through a document normally. So you'd have the people that use the solution or have the need for the end result. They have a chat to their local SMEs. The SME then has a discussion with the business analyst, who then has a discussion with or by discussion, produce documents and chuck it over the fence often. Passes that on to the person that does the functional design. Then you have that being passed to the technical design. Then you have being passed to the builders and so on. That when I was a kid, I was amazed by when you have the broken telephone game. I don't know if you guys played the broken telephone game when you were kids. I was amazed. It was a big light bulb moment for me, because even with a smallish group of people, maybe only about 10 kids, and each of them would hear the message in the one ear and they'd whisper it to the person next to them. They would then hear the message and whisper it to the person next to them. I was totally amazed by the fact that at the end, the message was totally different to what I'd heard at the beginning. And the same thing is happening in software developments, because you have people who speak different languages. So the language of business analysis is different to the language of functional definition, which is different to the language of technical and building and so on. So there's that translation that happens at each stage. And at each stage in that process, you have something lost. Now, the traditional approach to saying what went wrong and how do you fix it when you get something out the other side that doesn't match it is because they didn't put enough detail into it. They didn't ask all of the questions and note that down. But I think, as we mentioned earlier about the connective tissues, is that you can't put all of the detail into these documents, and it makes the process very costly to do that. So the vehicle for doing it should be the actual solution itself. And this particular principle is to to join the dots between those two extremes, to put the end people in touch with the people actually building the thing. And then they can be working together collaboratively to solve the problem. The next one you got is to build projects around motivated individuals and give them the environment and support they need to get the job done. And this is really, I don't know if servant leadership was really a big thing back in the day in 2001, but this is all about servant leadership. And if something I mentioned a bit later on in this presentation is referring to a book by Dan Pink called Drive. I don't know if you've read that book. Such an excellent reference to what motivates people. And there's a really good 6-minute YouTube video on that as well, which says that motivation comes from three things. Is autonomy, mastery, and purpose. If you can provide that to people, then they are going to be motivated. And if you take people that have those and they share a common vision, then they're going to be bringing all of themselves to work. They're going to be aligned, and they're going to be achieving the results. So that's having motivated individuals around that is critical. And another thing that I'd speak about a bit later is the book by David Marquette, who he's got this book called Turn the Ship Around, which is about the servant leadership approach to turning a submarine from being the worst performing submarine in the US Navy to being the best performing one, just by applying servant leadership. And I'll introduce his book. The next one we got here is the most efficient and effective method of conveying information to and within a development team is face-to-face conversation. So what this talks about is saying that the documents are of secondary importance. The main thing is about having that common understanding through conversations with people. Working software is the primary measure of progress. And it's still just as relevant today as it was back then. Agile processes promote sustainable development. The sponsors, developers, and users should be able to maintain a constant pace indefinitely. And for me, what's important about this one is that when you have a traditional approach where you have, you need to deliver a certain scope within a particular time frame with a particular quality and all that sort of thing, what you end up with is if you have delays happening early on and you haven't got enough contingency at the end to absorb those delays, you have this mad rush to meet this big deadline. So you have this crunching that happens in your build and in your test. And what happens when you have teams that are crunched is they revert back to, instead of using their creativity to solve the problems as they come up, they fall back on saying, what is the minimum I can do to be able to still achieve that deadline? Because I've got to cut away all of the things that aren't specific, that I'm not going to be held to account on. And that's when the documents suddenly become really important again, because you're not solving a problem anymore. You're meeting a deadline that's going to prevent you from being able to, from being told that you haven't met that deadline. And that mindset shift results in the problems that you have with that traditional approach. So this constant pace indefinitely is really about building an environment that maintains that creativity. Continuous attention to technical excellence and good design enhances agility. So that sounds like a bit of a tautology in the sense of saying who wouldn't want to have technical excellence and good design. But what he's actually saying here is that it enhances agility, which means that by following a process of having good design and technical excellence, means from a technical depth point of view and from a way in which you do things, you can be able to accommodate change more quickly. For example, if you, on the software side, if you build your integration using RESTful APIs, because you have that view in mind to say, how can we, should change come along, how do we take advantage of that? Now, that's not to say that you build necessarily for reuse, but that you build for resilience. And the same can be true for building data models that are well defined in terms of the way the entities are defined, in terms of the way that they relate to each other. Because also there's an element of simplicity that comes through on that. So the simplicity, this one I find really useful and important because from a traditional point of view, if you are brought in to deliver a set of things, and when you've delivered those set of things, then that's when you get the tick at the end to say that you've done what you promised to do. What this principle is about is to say that when you can find a way of achieving the same outcome by getting rid of things, to say we're not going to do certain things, then that's a win. That's something that should be celebrated, because it means that by cutting it off early, you've been able to really save all of that time and energy that you would have needed to have put into that. So I think that for me is one that really resonates. The second last one here is that the best architectures, requirements, and designs emerge from self-organizing teams. So this one's, when you go back to Dan Pink's book that I mentioned a bit earlier on what motivates people, his book called Drive, is he talks about the autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And autonomy is a big part of this one. If you have a team of people where they have a shared goal and they're able to self-organize, it means that they then can say that they've got all of that, they're totally empowered to take the problem that the team has been faced with, and as a team, so how are we going to tackle this? We've got one of the concepts that comes through in the Agile world as the three amigos. So you have say a person who has business analysis experience, you have someone who has testing experience, you have someone who has coding experience, come together and say, okay, so let's scratch our heads, how are we going to solve this? And then each person goes and tackles a different part of that at the same time, and then you end up taking that across the line. So by having the teams having that latitude to be able to self-organize frees them to be able to take their best selves in and have that ingenuity to be able to solve the problem. The last one that is on the principles is the at regular intervals, the team reflects on how to become more effective, then tunes and adjusts its behavior accordingly. So this one here is also, I think Einstein said that he said that compound interest is a force of nature. And I think where that comes from is to say that if you have incremental improvement over a period of time, you will see massive changes in the results. So if you, for example, have a 1% or 2% interest on something, and if you accrue that even weekly, then even over a period of a year, you see a massive difference. There's a really good book called Atomic Habits. I don't know if any of you have read that one, which applies the same principle to self-improvement, to say by having a regular cadence to have minor improvements as you go, the result is that you can transform yourself as a person. And I think what this last principle really talks about is saying that you need to make it as a team, as an organization, a priority to take time out at a frequent cadence to go and reflect and say, how have we done things? Where have we done? What have we done well? What haven't we done well? And then to incrementally improve. So those are the 12 principles and the 4 values. So I want you perhaps just to take a moment and just reflect on that, because I know some of you may not have come back and looked at it for a while. And I'm not sure if anyone in this room has not seen these before. But when we use the word, or when the word agile has been used in the past, this has been the document that defines what the word agile means. So agile doesn't mean anything else except for these 2 sets of lists that I've described. And I think that where we've kind of deviated from that, it's been where perhaps we've been riding on the bandwagon of the agile movement. But this is the document that defines what the word is. And I think words have meaning. Now I know that sounds a bit tautological, but when we look at defining something like a tree or a bird or a plane, by mentioning each of those words, we get a picture in our minds to say, what is it that we're talking about? And I think what's happened in the agile world is, because of the diffusion that we've experienced, is that it's a lot more difficult to get that picture in our mind as to exactly what it is that we're talking about when we use the word agile. So that's the main topic of what I'd like to talk about today. So what was the response to the Agile Manifesto coming out over the last 20 years? And I'd like to show you this picture. So this is a map that was put together by Christopher Webb. So he works for Deloitte, and I think they own the copyright to this one, is they, so he's in, this was from 2016. So what he did is he mapped out all of the the agile methods and processes at that time. And they stopped it at 2016. They didn't produce any more that I could find. And I believe the reason for that is that the number of items exploded from that point. That if you had to try and do that today and put all of these on one page, it wouldn't fit, because there's just so many. There's thousands and thousands of agile methods. So what I'm saying here is that the word agile has it's ended up with a kind of market value. That if you are wanting to go out there and do something in an agile way, then there are companies or executives or people that sometimes look at this in the same way that when you go to Coles or Woolworths and you say, well, I want to get a item of food, and you look on the label and you say, it says naturally sourced products, or sorry, ethically sourced products, or made from all natural ingredients. And it's kind of become like that extra label that you put on the end of your your project that you're doing, to say, I'm going to go out, I want to get a CRM system, I want to get I wanted to be done in this time, I wanted to deliver this thing, and it must be agile. So it becomes an extra thing that gets put on the tick of the box, and by ticking that box, there's this understanding that you end up getting all of the benefits of that have been associated with agile projects. But in a sense that because of the dilution of what it means to be agile, it means that in order to be able to tick that box, we are, as a community, need to do less and less in order to be able to tick and say this is agile. And I'll give you a couple of examples of that. Did you know that the most common implementation of Scrum at the moment around the world is Scrum 4, which is where you have a within a Scrum, you have, maybe if you have a, say, a 4-week or an 8-week sprint, and you have then your business requirements phase, and then you have your design phase, and your build phase, and then your testing phase, and you do that iteratively. That's become one of the most common implementations of Scrum. Another one that I'd like to highlight as a very common implementation of Agile in industry today is this one, where what you do is that you have your requirements. So you go through and you spend a bit of time, and you go and your business analyst will go and collect the requirements, and you then go through a bit of a design phase where you spend maybe a quarter of the project going and getting the design. And then you have the bit where you do Agile, which is where your developers will go and they will build the thing and maybe unit test it. And then after you've done Agile, then you go and have the testers go and do their system integration testing, and then your UAT. You then go and deploy it, and then you support it. And one implementation of that is that the stories become specifications. You have the developers never meet the customer staff. They are building, they need to be building, they don't need to be, they'll be confused by having that communication. The stories are assigned to one person only, and they work on the one story that they get. And the daily stand-ups are where the developers report progress to the Scrum Master. So essentially the Scrum Master then runs the meeting and says with each of the people, okay, so what did you do today? And why didn't you work on that other thing? And when you finish with that, let me know, and I'll give you your next piece of work. And individual developer performance is tracked. So what you find coming out of this is that all of the agile words are being used. So there's stand-ups, there's scrums, there's retrospectives tend to be the first one to be lost in that situation, because the team doing the retrospective doesn't have the power to change the process, because the process is defined by the organization, which means that they can't then do the retrospective. I mean, this pointless doing it. It's just a tick in the box. And that becomes an implementation of Agile. So So my contention and the point that I want to make is to say, in a world where agile can mean anything, then how is that not agile? How can we say as a community that that's not agile? So my call to action to this group and to anyone who watches the video is that we need to reclaim the word agile. We need to come back and we need to say, what does it mean? And the only way to do that is to come back to our original manifesto and say, when the word was created, this is what it meant. And if we're still true to those values, and I believe that those values are still really relevant today, then we need to hold to that. So the next thing I wanted to go into, and I know we've got 17 minutes or so, I want to leave a little bit of time for questions at the end. So I'll go a bit quicker. Let's look at what is a mindset. So what I did is I got ChatGPT to do some work for me, and it came up with this description of what a mindset is. And it really refers to saying that it's the way, your worldview, the way in which you see the world, your beliefs and your attitudes and your thoughts determining your perspective on the world. And that can be very much determined by your past experiences, your upbringing, your culture, and so on. So one look at that is looking at the difference between acting agile and being agile. So this is the inside out approach. Now, typically in a number of organizations, you'd have the idea that in order to become agile, what you got to do is you got to find out what are the things you need to do. So what meetings do you need to attend to? What's the structure of the meeting? How does work flow and all that sort of thing? You learn all of those things. So you do the practices bit, and then you sent out the door and you say, right, now you're agile, go forth and deliver the thing. And that then, if you do that, but you have the mindset of somebody who's perhaps more traditional in terms of their approach to things and see the world at that activity-based framework I spoke about earlier, then what tends to happen is that it's not as effective because you're not able to, all of the practices of Agile are there to support the mindset. So if you come from the perspective of having a mindset that's traditional, but you have Agile practices, then those are in conflict with each other and you don't deliver as much. You actually end up with a worse situation than if you had a traditional mindset that followed through to traditional practices. So this view is to say that you start off with an agile mindset, you then move on to having the mindset drive the values drive the principles drive the methods, and then they drive the practices. So that's the kind of the inside out approach, just saying you start by being agile, and then that allows you to act agile.
I just want to add to this one that this is one of the concerns I had always seen within my team, just like mindset issues where some people wouldn't like say daily stand-ups, would consider it as not really required or whatever, waste of time or whatever.
Yep.
And then I had to actually explain to them as to how it benefits us in removing the blockers and removing the impediments, and how this mindset was actually causing us issues, and how to actually realize that the agile mindset is the right way to go. So that's how I completely understand how mindset can be at the root of anything.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that's such a valuable comment, because from a mindset point of view, if you try and do something that disconnects with the mindset that you've got, then that disconnect is gonna be worse than if you had the other mindset.
Yes, certainly.
So really, really valuable. And I think one of the key differentiators that comes up quite frequently and is the difference between the fixed mindset and the growth mindset. And if you look at when you look through the agile values and principles, what you find is that a lot of them are associated with the growth mindset. Is that you look at failures as opportunities to learn, not as threats and reasons to avoid risks. That you embrace change to grow, whereas the fixed is looking at avoiding the challenges. So welcoming feedback as opposed to being defensive about the feedback.
Yes, that's right.
Actively seeking collaboration instead of preferring to work in silos. So all of these things that you have here, including the ones at the bottom, change and so on, is you'll see these resonated in those values. So if you follow the Agile values and principles, then what you have is a growth mindset. So that's the purpose of this slide. Now, the next thing I wanted to mention here, sorry.
Sorry about that. And this is what brings us to a very important aspect of Agile, and that is the retros.
Yes.
So having the retros is so important, like with each sprint, when we have the retros, we can actually discuss on what went wrong and what went well. And that's where the power of Agile comes into play, Even something as simple as acceptance criteria. Like I ensure that within my team, we have a good acceptance criteria, and that acceptance criteria can be modified as a developer works in discussion with the product owner. So as to ensure that it is what they want, with some screenshots. Something as simple as a screenshot can sometimes help understand the developers understand better. So these retros and these having better AC criteria, all these small things could help us improve the sprint velocity.
Absolutely.
So they're so important,
Yeah, very, very, very much, very important.
Yeah.
So if you look at the mindset-based approaches, this is also a reaction to what I believe is the process that I've just described in terms of the journey that we've been through. Is you have two methods that have come out two frameworks that have come out in the last few years. And my understanding of the approach taken by these two is to say, in a world where you have millions of different frameworks, and we understand that individuals and interactions are more important than processes and tools, one way of approaching that is to say, well, you can, I don't know if you've heard the term frameworks don't matter. Is to say, long as you have a framework that generally works, then all of those have that they all generally work. So what these do is, as for example, the Heart of Agile, which is from Dr. Alistair Coburn, who was one of the signatories of the Agile Manifesto. I went on his course for Heart of Agile, and what he said is that if you do these four things, and if you have little stickers that you put on your desk to remind you, so every time you look on the side there, you see the sticker, and it kind of gets your mind going, is you look at every single action that you do, and you say, are you collaborating? Are you delivering? Are you reflecting on something, or are you improving? And if you're not doing one of those things, then you should question, why are you doing that action at all? And by doing those things, it allows you to then think, can I do something that can allow me to collaborate more? Am I doing something that can allow me to deliver more? And running through that, so that by drawing from that incremental improvement that we spoke about a little bit earlier, then just gets you into the mindset that will naturally take you towards agility. And that's the heart of Agile. So that's the whole thing in a nutshell. And building that into your practice then drives agility. The other one is as modern Agile, which in a very similar way says that it's really focused on these four things: make people awesome, deliver value continuously, make safety a prerequisite, and experiment and learn rapidly. So if you do those things, then naturally you will develop the mindset that will move you more towards agility. So these are the mindset-based approaches, which in a sense is a reaction to the plethora of the million methods that you have out there. Now, I have a challenge for you. So what this one is I don't know if you are familiar with the Dunning-Kruger effect. So is everyone familiar with Dunning-Kruger? So what we have here is the bottom axis looks at competence, to say going from knowing nothing all the way to being a guru. The y-axis is going from having confidence, so at the bottom having low confidence, at the top having very high confidence. And what you find is that when you start out at the beginning, so say for example you have sword fighting, and you've never held a sword in your hand before, and someone comes to you and says, hey, are you good at sword fighting? And you say, well, I haven't tried it before, so no, I don't know anything about it. So you start having low confidence in your ability to do that thing. And then what you do is you grab one, you do a couple of swishing around, you cut some things, and then you get to this point where you have a very high level of confidence, because you feel that now that you've done it, you've got a good feel for the thing, you are now an excellent swordsman. And then you have a bit of a fight with jostle with somebody who really knows what they're doing. And all of a sudden you go back to the valley of despair because you find that you actually realize that you don't know as much as you thought you knew. And then over time, through hard work, you slowly but surely build up until you get to a point where your competence level is actually is at guru level, and your confidence is built up that you understand that you are actually at that guru level. Now, one thing I'd like to point out is that the what's called the peak of human stupidity, of the peak of Mount Stupid, is a very similar confidence level to the actual gurus and the actual experts. So it means a very small amount of knowledge can give people the understanding that they have a lot more understanding of the topic than they actually do, that they have a lot more competence in that area. And so when considering individuals and interactions over processes and tools, there's this view that the way in which you do things should be emergent. It shouldn't be prescriptive, that you go and you get people out there to go and do their thing. And as a result of that, you end up with a whole lot of people's voices being taken into account, and you kind of build a collaborative way of doing things. Now, the challenge with that is that when you have people in an organization who are at the top of Mount Stupid, and they have maybe a fair bit of credibility within the organization because they've been around for a long time, they've been building things for maybe the last 20 years or whatever the case is, they are perhaps have deep knowledge in other areas, but not necessarily in Agile. And they then become people that have this need to inject their thoughts into the process. That sometimes people see their value that they bring to an organization based on the extent to which they're guiding the organization in the direction that resonates with them. And so what you end up with is, rather than having a framework and process that works, is that you have a negotiated settlement between these powerful actors. And that can be corrosive to the extreme to the ability to be successful. And the problem with that is that you end up going through, you end up with people then saying, well, we tried Agile, it doesn't work. And then let's go back to traditional. And I've seen that happen. So the question I put to you is that, how do we keep these experts at bay, and to avoid that trap that comes along? And the answer that I've got to that is Shuhari. So I don't know if you're all familiar with Shuhari. So Shuhari comes from Japanese martial arts, and what it talks about is how you gain knowledge. So what it says is, when you have a skill, like for example, we were talking about sword fighting a little bit earlier, the first thing that you do in the shu stage, because there are 3 stages: the shu stage, the ha stage, and the re stage. In the shu stage, what you do is that you obey the rules. So you learn the rules and you implement them exactly as they've got down there. The ha stage is when you've gained enough understanding of the dynamics and how they fit together to start tailoring that to what you are doing. And then the re stage is when you've reached that guru level where you can start feeding that back into the delivery, so that, or you can then say, well, we need to evolve the model. This is a way of building the next generation. Now, if everyone thinks that they're a re, then you have those problems. And this is one of the reasons why I've recently become a bit of a SAFe convert. And the reason being is, I used to be quite skeptical of SAFe because of the fact that individuals and interactions over processes and tools suggest that you shouldn't have a prescriptive framework. But if you go in with an adaptive situation where it's adaptive from the start, in an organization where you have a whole lot of different players that are involved with doing things in different ways and wanting to do it their way, and it becomes a power struggle, then you don't get the result. So what I've enjoyed about looking at prescriptive methodologies is that it allows you to achieve the shu stage in in your organizational implementation. I'm talking about this at scale, obviously, when you've got teams of hundreds of people, as opposed to maybe just having a Scrum team that is a lot more, it's much more possible to influence. But certainly with large implementations, I think that having a prescriptive framework allows you to get past the shoe stage, and then allows you to evolve from there. So that's a personal opinion from my side. I'm not saying everyone has to go that way, but that's my argument for why I had that bit of a light bulb moment in my head around SAFe, because I used to be somebody that was SAFe critical.
John, I've got the similar. It's also, if you start off with Agile and you're in the shoe phase still, it allows you to have a prescriptive set of practices, whatever you want to call it, to get through that valley of despair.
Yeah.
Because you will first have to do it, understand it before you start getting into the slope of enlightenment. Otherwise, you will not come there. Josna, I think, that is also the reason why, for example, Scrum has the daily stand-up. That's also the first thing what happens. These people, the experts, are on that peak of Mount Stupid, and they have seen it all, they know it all, they have done it 3 times, and the conclusion is all clear because of the lack of competence and going through this at least for 1 or 2 years probably, to really start to understand it, and then they can see what really then they get to the enlightenment and the sustainability. But if you have made up your mind within 6 stand-ups, this is not for us, you're probably on that peak of Mount Stupid.
Yeah, that's so true.
Absolutely. So that was my challenge. I've had a couple of slides on some useful concepts, but I'm not going to run through them because we don't have time. They were really sort of my call it the end of the backlog. Just looking at directional decisions, which is a concept that I got from Tony Ponton. There's the concept of servant leadership. This is the book that I was talking about earlier from Captain David Marquette, Turn the Ship Around. We've got the book by Dan Pink around servant leadership, where he talks about autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And then the call to action that I've got. So my call to action here is to say, let's stop accepting the use of the word agile to refer to traditional approaches with lipstick added. I know it's quite a strong statement, but that's my call to action for us. And that's the end of my talk. So I'll open the floor to questions. And thank you all for listening to what I had to say.
Thanks, John. I've got a question. If you go back to that page with the mindsets, with the different, the heart of Agile, that one.
I've got to check this one.
Yeah, that one. Heart of Agile and the modern Agile. So it says that mindset-based approaches. I've never really dived into the heart of Agile and the modern Agile because, and correct me, I had the feeling that this is just a different model, a different presentation of actually what the Agile Manifesto does. Or am I incorrect here?
Yes, and that's my understanding as well. But I think the idea was that, and my understanding of the idea, because from going through the Heart of Agile course with Alistair, is that the 17 people that went to build the Agile Manifesto, put it together, came there with a whole lot of different ideas about what they wanted to achieve, and they came out with what they had as a nugget of truth. It said, this is how we can do things in a better way. And the understanding here is that we've kind of lost that way by going through all of the million frameworks that we've got, and a lot of them being kind of very specific and prescriptive in a lot of different ways. But what this does is it kind of brings it back to the core, to say, what was that core thing that you need to do? And the calling it a mindset-based approach is really something that I put in there. And the reason why I put it in is because I believe that the core of this is to change the way you think about how you do work. And what that allows you to do is to then apply that way of thinking to every action that you have, and to think and to see the world through the lens of agility. And I believe that, to answer your question, yes, I think it is restating the Agile Manifesto, but only insofar as it becomes a lens to observe how you do things.
So it complements basically, because a mindset-based approach, I like that term, by the way. If you put in that on that, I think it's a great term actually. But I do think you can just put the Agile Manifesto in here as well. That is also a mindset-based approach. It states no practices, no methods. It just states values and principles, purely based on, if I mean, the first one is what is it? People and interaction over processes and tools. If I have a problem with my organization, I don't know how to solve it, I'm looking for solutions in the area of people and interactions over that are going to create another process, or I'm going to buy another tool. And that is also influencing your mindset constantly, every day, every hour, how you respond to reality. Yeah.
Absolutely.
This would be complementary then, the heart of Agile then, to reinforce that message.
Yes. So my thinking was that the Agile Manifesto was probably the umbrella, the kind of starting point for everything, and that everything else that we'd spoken about was falling within that umbrella. And that I agree with you with these being complementary, but to a large extent supporting that. So kind of trying to get back to that original nuggets of what it was.
It's interesting that you've mentioned the term umbrella, because if you look at the Agile Manifesto, so you had people, when they came together and formed it, they already had their own things, right? Like extreme programming, Scrum, DSDM, etc. Yeah, they already had their own things. And what they agreed on was the things that were in the Agile Manifesto. Yeah. But that's all that they agreed on. And they had lots of other things in all of their ways of working, right? Which don't all necessarily align. In fact, some of them don't align at all. Some of them deal with different things, like project management, right? There's nothing about that in Scrum, right? Funding a project. Yeah. So from the start, in terms of, I think at the practice end, or the, people get into this big argument about methodologies and works, whatever you want to call them, right? So from the very start, it was an umbrella term for a whole lot of different practices, and they didn't all line up. Yeah, the only thing that lined up was this Agile Manifesto. Yeah, and not necessarily everything else lined up in them. If you look at that umbrella now, right, it's just expanded. And that diagram that you showed from PwC, that shows you how that umbrella just got bigger and bigger. There are things in there that aren't agile, right? And design thinking, for one, right? If you went to any of the design thinking schools like Stanford or IDEO or Ledka, who developed her model of design thinking, they would not say that they're agile. Yep. Someone's just vacuumed all these things up, right, and said, oh, okay, let's make this umbrella bigger, and this is part of Agile, and this is part of Agile, and this is as well. That don't necessarily have anything to do with those original principles.
That makes it probably also vulnerable, the Agile Manifesto. People put things under the umbrella that don't belong there. On the other hand, I think what you explain as well is how good the Agile Manifesto has survived the test of time. It's so powerful in a way that 17 people, and we know, get 17 experts together, you get probably 21 opinions that they could agree on. And I think it's very powerful on these 4 basic Agile values, plus, as you mentioned as well, later on as well, these 12 principles. But that makes it why it's still standing up here. We're still talking about that term and that manifesto.
Yeah, sorry, I don't mean to monopolize this, but that's a really interesting point as well. I would almost like say that's up to this point, and I actually my personal, I'm hearing a lot of noise that the kind of this, the wheels are falling off Agile, it's becoming a dirty word. Etc. etc. I don't use the term agile, right? I don't call myself an agile anything, because organizations, once they've been through 3, 5, whatever agile transformations, they don't want to hear that word anymore. And I think part of that is because it is just this umbrella, right? Like it's not just this one thing, yeah? So if you look at some other things, say like, for example, you know, and I'm not an expert in this, but Six Sigma, for example, there's a really defined body of knowledge, yeah? There's not all these other things that you can say, oh yeah, and that's also part of it, that's also part of it, yeah? So you know, whether that's a good thing for an organization or not, who knows? But it's one thing. It's kind of easy to identify and say that's the thing, and we did this, and yes, we got these results from it. Whereas I talk to people and they're, you know, one person's implementing a release train and the other's implementing a scrum of scrums, and someone else thinks they're agile because they're using Jira, right?
Yeah,
And it's this.
And I think to a large extent that's because the word agile has become marketable. So it means if you tick the box because you've got, you know, naturally sourced products, or you've got you know, CFC free sprays and all that sort of thing. So it's a label that's put onto delivery, and then it becomes people doing the practices, which result in the thing not necessarily, or even some of the practices resulting in it not necessarily succeeding. And part of that also, if you look at the plethora of methods and processes out there that have the agile label, how many of those actually have followed the principles and values that we discussed at the beginning in the manifesto? That and I think one can point to some which don't follow very many of them at all, but still get used in agile transformation to go towards that thing.
Yes, it's a lot of people would say safe. As soon as you said that, a lot of people would say safe, which is really interesting that you mentioned it earlier on. That's one of the major criticisms about safe, is that it violates some of those fundamental values and principles.
And this is what John was explaining as well. I also had a bit this epiphany as well. I think 9 years ago, we were all on the bandwagon with Ken Schwaber calling safe unsafe at any speed. That's an article on the internet. You read it, read on it clearly. I was actually at that moment agreeing with him as well. It's too prescriptive. But on the other hand, I also came to the conclusion that many times we just fail to get through this Mount Stupid. So people on that journey in their first steps, you need to give them something prescriptive so that you don't have an argument, but can say, look, we are operating within the Agile Manifesto, but to make this clearer for you for day-to-day process. And this is also why I always advocated Scrum in a way. But on the other hand, I must agree then as well. Then also initially, I would say if you start with a large organization, yes, do something like SAFe and start from there, because you can always stick to that prescriptive methodology. And if you are through this valley of despair, yeah, now you can go in this enlightenment phase, and then probably you want to back SAFe, throw it out and do it your own way. But if you don't get through that, I don't think that just the Agile Manifesto, not even Heart of Agile, those mindset-based, what did you call them, methodologies or something, or frameworks, you will not get there, because what constantly happens, that's my experience, is that you have these people standing up on top of Mount Stupid and then calling out, this was nothing, this whole Agile thing. And this is why Agile got burned down as well. It's these people who stand on that mountain and shout through it to everyone, this is bullshit, this is the end, we shouldn't be doing this. And yeah, then that's where the bad name, I think, for Agile comes from. But on the other hand, throwing away the term, and I think that's, John, what you said in the beginning, I think Agile stands, and we if we just let that go, that manifesto, where do we then we have to start over again? And we're working on this for more than 20 years already. Go back to the 90s. It was a bad decade. We didn't have this manifesto at all. Some of you are maybe a bit older. That was a very we were bulldozed by waterfall in IT. I almost left IT in a way because I had enough of it, and I had the same with the Agile Manifesto. It resonated with me, and it is given the complexity we're dealing with, a very good mindset to work with and to refer to as well.
I think there's no doubt that SAFe for some organizations is better than what they previously had. That's almost, you know, that's definitely truth in that. I think the thing I'd really challenge though is using safe and shuhari, because I'm pretty sure that I haven't met anyone in safe that thinks that it's a shu kind of solution, right? It's the complete solution, right? I haven't, and look, you know, obviously I've got my, you know, blinkered view of the world, people that I've met, but I haven't heard anyone talking about, oh, we're going to start off with safe and then we're going to evolve it.
Cool.
Because I don't see safe positioned in that way.
So Ethan, if you can hold that point for a second, I'm just looking at the time, is that I think we've run out of the time that I'd allocated to this activity. I think what we should do is let me stop the recording and then let people go and have their dinners and things that they need to. And I'll stay on the line for anybody that wants to stay, and we can continue the conversation if you want. Ethan, does that? Okay, excellent. So thank you everyone for joining tonight. Hopefully you got some insights that you didn't have before, or had some pause for thought. And you know, really appreciate you. It's been a real honor and a real privilege to be able to speak to you. So thank you so much.